Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. The year is 2006. The US war in Iraq is entering its third year. The Motorola Razr is the coolest phone money can buy. And everybody is quoting Borat. Jack Thompson, a lawyer and activist, has been well known for over 2 decades as the face of a moral panic, one of the most outspoken critics of violence and obscenity in media. Jack has just recently penned his magnum opus. It's called A Modest Video Game Proposal, and the essay describes a made-up scenario in which a grieving father goes on a killing spree, all because of electronic gaming media. There was already a script for this kind of thing by 2006, and there were plenty of real-world tragedies that activists would trot out to make their arguments. Video game violence had been a hot topic since the early 90s, so it was definitely strange that Mr. Johnson decided to write a fanfiction about it. But Jack's proposal contained something more exciting than just creative writing. It included a bounty. $10,000 to charity if someone would release a game, a quote, murder simulator, in which the player actively participates in the slaughter of lawyers, children, and video game company executives. The year is 2006, and I am playing that game. I am peeing on brains. Jack Thompson was an attorney born in Florida in 1951. I use the past tense was, not because he's dead, but because he has since been disbarred. In his early career, Thompson worked as a prosecutor and later entered private practice in Miami, and during the 1990s he built a public reputation through media appearances, mainly tied to the evils of rap music. Let me tell you, this motherfucker hates rap music. In 1990, he campaigned to censor the rap group 2 Live Crew and their album As Nasty As They Wanna Be. The album was labeled obscene and its distribution was restricted. Then, in 1992, Jack attacked Ice-T over the song Cop Killer, and supported by police and activist groups, he pressured Body Count into removing the song from later pressings of the album.
Ice-T no longer has a contract with Warner Brothers Records. The company released him after all the protest about his Cop Killer song.
All the while, Jack was becoming a prominent figure in the public eye with an increasing number of media appearances where he talked about obscenity and violence in music and movies, family values, and the dangers of pornography. And Jack garnered a lot of media attention around this time with outrageous quotes such as,
"I have sent my opponents pictures of Batman to remind them I'm playing the role of Batman. Just like Bruce Wayne helped the police in the movie, I have had to assist the sheriff of Broward County."
All in all, Jack was really making a name for himself. He had a flair for the dramatic, and he was not afraid to prey on the fears and insecurities of a conservative audience for personal profit. But he could go lower.
Dad, I can go lower.
Moving into the new millennium, obscenity on the radio just wasn't getting the media attention that it used to. Rap music wasn't scary enough anymore, and conservative parents needed something new to wring their hands about. But worry not, because there was something worse on the horizon, something much worse. A new moral contagion was corrupting our youth, turning them into killers, and it was already in our homes.
The latest shooting has sparked calls for changes in many different areas. That includes a proposal to take a closer look at violent video games.
Violent video games.
The popularity of violent video games.
That game makes me sick to my stomach.
Sounds like a pretty thrilling game, and this is the kind of violence that critics are pretty worried about.
At the time the violent video game debate was picking up steam, America was at the height of a severe and poorly understood spike in violent crime, which surged over the 80s and into the 90s. A correlation was drawn at this time, by some, between the increased violent crime and new forms of media violence. Rap music and violent games were favorite targets. A correlation between violent games and real-world violence was a start, but it was a statistic, not a story. But if you could link violent video games not just to trends, but to real-world tragedy, that's where the money is. In 1999, Thompson drew a link between the 1997 Heath High School shooting and violent video games. Thompson represented the families of victims in a $130 million lawsuit against various video game companies. This lawsuit was summarily dismissed, citing a weak and unproven causal link between video games and the incident. But this was just the beginning. The moral panic continued to escalate when one of the highest profile tragedies and biggest news stories of 1990s America was directly linked to a violent game.
Is shooting what looks like a shotgun, shooting creatures from outer space, people are telling me. This looks like a library. They're shooting people, leaving them lying on the floor. Many people have speculated that this was similar to the incident.
On April 20th, 1999, two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, carried out a mass shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado. The attack killed 12 students and one teacher before both shooters died by suicide. The pair had planned the attack for months. The massacre triggered an enormous media response in the United States. Television networks provided near-continuous coverage, bringing on psychologists, politicians, lawyers, and other talking heads to debate topics such as bullying, access to firearms, and, of course, violence in media. The media focused a lot of reporting on Doom, which was also one of the games centered in the Heath High School shooting case. Doom was a game enjoyed by both shooters. Harris even created custom Doom levels, and this detail was played up by the news media a lot at the time. Doom was portrayed as a training program where the shooters built their own levels of Columbine High School to prepare and practice for the massacre.
Doom, a video game licensed by the US military to train soldiers to kill. In a classroom project, the pair made a videotape of their own version, in which they dressed in trench coats, carried guns, and killed school athletes. They did it again, in the school, with real guns less than a year later. One researcher described Harris, 18, and Klebold, 17, as playing out their game in God mode.
Later investigations found all such claims to be exaggerated or unsubstantiated. There was no Columbine map attributed to the shooters, just rumors and hoaxes created after the fact. But the connection between Columbine and Doom became one of the canon moments in the public debate over video game violence. And in the wake of the tragedy, the media coverage of violent video games escalated even further. Doom was a single data point in a sea of noise surrounding a tragedy, but nonetheless became a critical focus of the massacre's narrative, at least as far as the public perception of the event was concerned.
John, thank you for answering that. I know that is a difficult question, but I think it's just so important because I too agree that these video games send the wrong message, and we live in a completely different day and age as to when our Constitution was written, and I agree with you 100%.
The violent video game debate continued to snowball as games became more graphically realistic and commercially dominant. Games such as Grand Theft Auto and Manhunt presented what at the time felt like viscerally realistic, grounded, and adult portrayals of brutal acts of violence. And many studios courted this controversy. Rockstar Games was particularly known to do so, and went as far as famously hiring a high-profile publicist specifically to disseminate false information and fuel an endless outrage news cycle.
Grand Theft Auto is a world governed by the laws of depravity.
Sorry, but I need this.
A world of make-believe battles, Jack Thompson considers himself a real-life warrior. The conservative Christian attorney says he is on a mission to protect children from evil. Evil in the form of popular games like Bully, Manhunt, and Grand Theft Auto. To him, this is not entertainment, it is a murder simulator.
But there's no such thing as bad press, and the violent video game rhetoric catapulted these studios, like Rockstar, into becoming household names, while Grand Theft Auto sold dozens of millions of copies. By the early 2000s, Thompson was already one of the most visible anti-game activists in the United States. Congressional hearings examined violence in games, while cable news programs regularly featured segments about gaming addiction, school shootings, and youth aggression, and Thompson filed and threatened numerous lawsuits related to violent games and school shootings. Although none of Thompson's lawsuits at this time were actually successful, he did have a continuous platform to argue that the games industry knowingly profited from violence while avoiding accountability, and he made good use of it. Thompson's highest profile controversies at this time squared him up directly against Rockstar Games.
And when it comes to the company behind some of the most mature titles, he is hardly coy.
I'm out to shut down Rockstar because because they're run by a bunch of sociopaths.
One lawsuit, the second high-profile cop killer case of Jack Thompson's career, centered on an $800 million lawsuit filed in 2005 against the makers of Grand Theft Auto. The suit argued that the game caused 18-year-old Devin Moore to murder 2 police officers and a dispatcher in Fayette, Alabama, and despite the profile of the case, he was unsuccessful in linking the company to the crime. But probably the biggest splash, both in mainstream and gaming circles, and perhaps for different reasons, was the hot coffee controversy. In 2005, modders discovered a hidden minigame in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas which contained sexually suggestive content. Normally inaccessible, it could be restored through mods or cheat devices if players went out of their way to knowingly do so. This was a juicy story, obviously, and Thompson was at the forefront of a successful lobbying effort to change the game's rating from mature to adults only. This may not sound like much, but adults only is generally reserved for games with explicit pornographic content. This meant that most retailers, such as Walmart, GameStop, and EB Games, would not stock the item at all. By 2005, violence in video games had become a full-blown culture war issue, pulling in legislators, media watchdog groups, and game publishers. And at this time, there was a vast cultural and countercultural divide developing on this issue. Games were still an outsider medium, at risk of being a completely ostracized one and actively being legislated against with risks of severe censorship. So here you had on the one hand, the entire establishment mainstream media apparatus, and on the other hand, you had a bunch of nerds in gaming communities just trying to get the bikini mod to work in Unreal Tournament. It's not hard to see how one side dominated the debate for so long. But gaming spaces on the internet ridiculed Jack Thompson ruthlessly. It is rare and remarkable when an entire online community collectively decides that one individual in particular can just go fuck themselves, and it's even rarer when that person deserves it. Jack Thompson was so outspoken, so hyperbolic, so visible in the mainstream, and so asinine that you couldn't help but hate him. Every webcomic had a go at him. They were hosting Photoshop Jack Thompson contests, which prompted cease and desist letters. He was the face of everyone who didn't get it.
Kids who wear I Hate Jack Thompson t-shirts can trade blows with his likeness in the game Mortal Kombat. Who uses what sort of fighting style?
It's called legalese.
He was the face of the people outside of the community, and he was that guy everyone loved to hate.
The Army was using Halo on a sniper base to do one thing, to get the snipers prepared psychologically to be willing to kill as snipers.
In a CBS News article on February 2005, Jack Thompson is quoted,
"You just watch. There is going to be a Columbine times 10 incident and everyone will finally get it. Either that, or some video gamer is going to go Columbine at some video game exec's expense, or at E3, and then the industry will begin to realize that there is no place to hide, that has trained a nation of Manchurian children. Kids took guns to school for 200 years in this country without turning them on one another. President Clinton understood that if we want to do something about gun violence, we need also to look at the stimuli to use those guns. 3,000 gun laws on the books, not a single law on the books to stop the sale of murder simulators to kids. Idiotic."
On October 10th, 2005, Thompson published an open letter titled A Modest Video Game Proposal. An essay of 800 words, Thompson proposed a hypothetical game scenario in which a grieving father of a murdered child hunts down and kills video game executives, just like his musings in the CBS interview earlier that year. He really thought he was cooking with that one. Thompson said if a developer would create, manufacture, distribute, and sell such a game in 2006, he would donate $10,000 to a charity chosen by the then chairman of Take-Two Interactive. The title is, of course, a reference to A Modest Proposal, the satirical essay by Jonathan Swift that we all probably read in high school. In the original essay, Swift encourages landlords to eat babies, based. So the namesake is satire, but Thompson's proposal, I think, misunderstands the purpose of satire at best. Thompson's stated purpose here was that he wanted video game studios to understand the fear that violent video games struck in the hearts of police. A fear that they had to suffer from every single day due to violent video games, and that this would cause game studio executives to change their evil ways. Of course, this is all theater. He didn't really believe any of this. This is a rhetorical device used to paint video game developers as villains and the police as victims of some nebulous game-making conspiracy. Thompson did not believe that any developer would actually make this game. Here is a partial list of games already released at the time of the proposal that allowed you to kill video game developers. In Doom 2, notable game series Doom, you may have heard of it, you can shoot and kill the severed head of John Romero, the game's creator. That is an Easter egg though, Jack Thompson says it doesn't count. So, in Postal 2, you can go to the Running with Scissors studios and kill the developers of the game, and in the expansion pack, this was expanded to a full level. But that came out before 2006, so this only counts for 2006 games. And that also excludes Dink Smallwood. I couldn't find anybody talking about this one at the time, but the final boss of that game is Seth, the game's creator, who you murder.
Forests are filled with evil monsters, ruled over by the evil Seth, and you have to defeat the evil Seth.
Then, of course, there's Defamation of Character, a Jack Thompson murder simulator, which is a Grand Theft Auto San Andreas mod that has Jack Thompson himself killing the Rockstar development team before they can release the game Bully. That came out mere weeks before the challenge was issued, but he says, no, that's a mod. Does not count. When it became clear that Thompson had no intention of ever paying this money, Penny Arcade creators Jerry Holkins and Mike Kraholic donated $10,000 to charity in Thompson's name. The memo line on the check to the ESA Foundation read, "For Jack Thompson, because Jack Thompson won't." And just to make this abundantly clear, the date they made this donation was October 17th, 2005. 1 week after the challenge was issued, with a whole 14 months for someone to complete a game, because everybody knew that Human Cigarette Jack Thompson wasn't going to donate a dime. But that didn't mean that nobody was going to make the game. Derek Yu is an independent games developer and illustrator born 1982 in the United States of America. Yu began making games at a very young age, forming Black Eye Software with his childhood friend Jonathan Perry while they were still teenagers. And Black Eye Software dabbled a lot in the late 90s, early 2000s edgelord kind of vibe, during which time they published games under a freeware license including Booger Bungee, a timeless premise if you ask me, Trigger Happy, Kill Osama version 1.5, and Diabolica and Diabolica 2, The Devil's Last Stand. In interviews, Derek Yu has cited the id Software catalog as a specific inspiration, particularly for Diabolica, and you can see Doom's DNA all over those games. Doom, of course, notable game series Doom, criticized for its violent content, the same Doom that if you watched mainstream news regularly, you might believe drove the Columbine shooters to engage in a senseless massacre. Needless to say, of course, Derek and other members of the indie game community decided to take Jack up on his offer, despite the fact that it would mean putting themselves in the crosshairs of a famously litigious culture war attorney who had no intention of paying any money to charity, but they did it for the love of the game. Organized through online games forums, they formed the parody label Thompson Soft with the sole and specific purpose of creating a game based on Thompson's modest proposal. Chris Hansen joined as lead programmer using the Multimedia Fusion development toolset, Philippe Jones provided background art, Christopher Howard Wolf contributed map graphics, and Alec Haloka composed music for the game. Together, and in only a few short months, they made the game Thompson had described. I'm O.K. a murder simulator released freeware in February 2006. But was the game any good? I'm OK starts with a very tongue-in-cheek vignette that plays out the scenario described in Thompson's proposal. It's juvenile, it's in bad taste, but it does a good job of highlighting the contradictions inherent in Thompson's crusade. And when all these identical-looking buff lawyers and witnesses cut to the defendant and it's just this skinny little goth kid, it's stupid, and it's still funny. From there, the game has the player murdering a video game executive in their home, shooting up game stores, slaughtering lawyers, massacring an arcade, and eventually tearing up E3 itself. In the actual gameplay, you have a melee and basic pistol attack, both with unlimited ammo. You have an unlimited amount of pee in your bladder. You can pick up additional weapons and health kits as you go, and you get a bonus stage at the end of every level to collect coins and a shop to buy weapons. The Uzi is a fast and consistent weapon, but it's weak and expensive to shoot. The shotgun is slow firing but cheap. The machete, which you throw, is a very strong single projectile attack. And the rocket launcher is exactly what you would expect. You also have a dedicated button for Molotovs, which are costly but create a fiery hazard that takes up half the screen. Certain attacks leave flames on the ground, and these can damage both you and your enemies. I found myself taking a ton of incidental damage the first time I played, and it took me a while to realize that the reason you have a dedicated P button is to put out these fires. The game has 4 levels, and it takes about 30 minutes if you breeze through it, but the game is actually kind of tough. You have 1 health bar that refills at the end of each level, and a total of 3 continues for the whole game. This is obviously a skill issue, but it did take me a few tries, although it's not nearly as difficult as a Metal Slug game. The controls are definitely antiquated, the game doesn't support controllers, hitboxes feel a little off, and in the chaos of battle it's really hard to see which enemies are getting hit, and which are dying and which are recovering and going to keep attacking you. Enemies also seem to soak up bullets in their dying animation, which makes timing attacks difficult, and there's just so much coming at you from every direction at all times, it can kind of blend together into visual noise. Unfortunately, there are also bugs that can cause you to get hit every single frame if you enter a cutscene while still in battle. This is a pretty bad time. It makes the game much harder until you know what to avoid, because you can just burn a life out of nowhere. There are no secrets, there are no side paths to speak of, no platforming, and the bosses are very, very simple, but the game doesn't feel simple and it doesn't feel cheap. It adds just a little bit of flair and a little bit of variety every level, and it keeps things interesting. The first level has a locked door and key, the second level has elevators, the third has exploding arcade machines. The game also looks and sounds great. Derek Yu is a talented illustrator, and the writing is fiercely satirical in a ruthless kind of way, and very much a relic of the time period that it was released in. The final battle places you in front of the game's developers, who are promptly crushed by a metallic Mario, and that is the true final boss of the game. After unloading about 50 rockets into him, you're forced to flee the collapsing wreckage of the E3 Entertainment Expo, and you get a nice little cutscene with Osaki Kim where he declares, through tearful eyes, "I killed every video game maker in the world. It's all over." Credits.
Don't you understand? The video games are art imitating life, and then you get a bleed over of life imitating the art.
So with all that said, is the game any good? It's a 20-plus-year-old freeware title. Those don't hold up amazingly well, usually, especially today when we have so many high-quality indie games at our fingertips. But in a vacuum, it is kind of fun. It's an unserious run-and-gun game, and just as a pure game, it's pretty good, but I think as a cultural relic, it's kind of priceless. Understanding the context around what it is and why it exists, understanding the satire and the subjects it pokes fun at, I would actually still recommend this game even today. It costs nothing, and it's fun, and it's just a little pebble tossed into the pond of gaming history. After the game's release, Jack Thompson, to the surprise of no one, rejected the claim that the developers had fulfilled his challenge. Quote, "Didn't care one bit, since we never actually intended to meet his challenge. He's a coward, and one does not take a coward's challenge seriously. He has no intention of ever paying up, and we knew that he would find some way to weasel out of it." Unquote. Thompson argued that the game didn't qualify because it had not been commercially published by a professional studio, but he always maintained that he would have paid the bounty if any game released had ever met his standards. Thompson is not believed to have ever donated a dime related to this challenge.
When you step into the virtual world of Call of Duty,
Kill confirmed.
you're on a mission to take as many lives as possible.
Posterity has largely exonerated violent video games in regards to their impact on real-world violence. Generously, you could say that at the time of this debate, it remained contested, but it was really already becoming clear in 2006, and it has only become more clear in the decades since. The rise in violent crime in the 1980s and 1990s has nothing to do with video games, it has nothing to do with rap music, it's all nonsense. The biggest evidence of this fact is that the trends in violence have reversed, despite the ever-rising availability of violent media. These jumps and subsequent falls in crime are more commonly now hypothesized to be linked to other environmental factors. Usually leaded gasoline is at the top of the list. Demonstrating a causal link carries a pretty high bar, but overall the discussion seems pretty settled on the topic. You can also see that countries that had the same access to video games in the 90s did not have the same trends in violence, and certainly not the same trends in school shootings, where the United States is an extreme outlier. Large-scale meta-analyses through the 2010s and 2020s repeatedly found limited or inconsistent evidence linking video games to real-world violent crime. Youth trends did not correlate cleanly with game sales or exposure, and some studies even find a reverse correlation. Anecdotally, of course, I was one of the youth that was corrupted by the likes of Doom and Mortal Kombat and Pokemon. I have not been convicted of any murders, but I do worship Satan and I am an anarchist, so we're just going to call that one a wash. With the lens of history applied, this decades-long controversy is clearly just one in a long string of moral panics. It echoes the equally unfounded backlash against rap music in the late 80s, which Thompson was an active participant in. Before that, of course, was the satanic panic of the early 80s that linked thousands of unsubstantiated claims of ritual satanic abuse to heavy metal music and role-playing games. Even going back to the 40s and 50s, rock and roll and horror comics were under the scrutiny for largely the same reasons. Time and time again, these panics all prove to be overwhelmingly unfounded. They are blatantly emotional responses to new forms of culture and unfamiliar media that conservatives fear because they don't understand. When I was playing NetHack and Neopets and reading webcomics and posting on gaming forums as just a young lad, I understood that this was all kind of niche at the time. It was a little bit underground. But this incident drove home for me that it wasn't just that. The gaming community at this time in history, and particularly the online indie community, was a counterculture. We had norms and shared values and social leaders and even a cultural history. I want to embrace the cringe here, it all felt very punk rock. This juvenile argument litigated across courtrooms and on TV, but also in webcomics and indie games, was symbolic of a growing divide between the mainstream and these countercultural online spaces. Yes, we collectively said, we know about the violence. We like the violence. You can't take it from us. 2006 was still the early days of social media. Facebook was still cool. There was a stark divide between the online and real life. Most people were barely internet literate, let alone internet native. But this was an early case where independent creators responded to a high-profile public controversy immediately and essentially with the unanimous support of their community. These days, of course, the agility with which we react to controversy has become a bit of a double-edged sword, but in 2006 it hadn't been co-opted yet, and it was still optimistic. It was power to the people. In 2011, the US Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association that violent video games were protected speech under the First Amendment. The court noted that existing research did not demonstrate a causal connection between games and violent criminal behavior to sufficiently justify any form of restrictions. I'm O.K, a murder simulator, is now best recognized as an artifact from that moment in time. a cultural flash in the pan that seems a little bit quaint and a little bit silly in retrospect. It's mainly cited these days as one of the many early games in Derek Yu's back catalog of freeware. Yu is now best known for the commercial indie cult classics Aquaria, Spelunky, and Spelunky 2, each multi-award winners in their own right. Composer Alex Holoka would later create Aquaria with Yu. He later became internationally known for A Night in the Woods, released in 2017. The game received a widespread critical acclaim for its writing, themes, and music, and also won a BAFTA award for narrative. Philippe Jones and Chris Hansen went on to live lives outside of the public eye, and Christopher Howard Wolfe founded the company Wrong Games, working on projects including Dragonspires, Hell Rising, and Scroll Wars. He now contributes to the online horror and creepypasta website, Slime Beast. Jack Thompson was repeatedly sanctioned by courts for misconduct and inflammatory filings in the years surrounding and following this controversy. In 2008, the US Supreme Court permanently disbarred him, citing professional misconduct. He went on to file some lawsuits that went nowhere and has since fallen from the public eye. In the mid-2010s, Thompson was teaching classes to inmates in the Everglades Correctional Institution, and as a 75-year-old man now, he is probably enjoying a quiet retirement. I'm OK is worth a download if just to experience the audacity of it all. It's still available on Derek Yu's website, so extreme props to him for owning this moment in history, even if it is a little bit cringy by today's standards. Personally, I love the early 2000s edge, it's a delicious nectar to me, and it's just an exciting time capsule when you understand the context that it was made with, and the intense disdain that was pointed towards a single garbage human being. If you want to find these games today, in addition to Derek Yu's website, they are widely available on abandonware sites and archive.org. I've shared a link containing each download in the description below. Hey everybody, I am a millennial. I know. That means I'm obsessed with the media of my youth. But it's not all bad. I have some cool videos in the works about game design and the history of digital media that, if you enjoyed this video, you might find interesting. And I think they'll be better than this one, because this one was a real learning experience for me in the scripting and editing department. So, if this brought you joy, consider throwing me a subscribe or completing any of those other arcane YouTube rituals that the algorithm desires. And if you do, maybe I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
She put her arm on your shoulder and said, I'm only attracted to virile men, which is why I'm not attracted to you. Mm-hmm. And then you filed battery charges against her.
Well, she grabbed a hold of me.